Hello. Good evening. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. I've had a few technical issues today. They've changed some of the settings around on Facebook, and so streaming videos now is a little bit different, and it took me a moment to adjust. So let me just go through that now and sort that out. So thanks again for your patience. Appreciate you joining tonight. It was an interesting one. Tonight, I want to talk about something that is deeply personal to me. It's something that I've been exploring a lot with my practice, and something that brings me a great deal of joy, and is also really challenging. But before I do, I'll just again like to acknowledge that I join you today from the Gadigal lands of the inner west of Sydney by the Cooks River, and this land was never ceded and still is country, and acknowledge the ancestors of past, present, and future. Thanks everybody for jumping back in. It was a bit challenging actually. They've changed the interface and it totally confused me, and then it brought me back to my own page and seeing all my family members jump in, and that thought made me realize, I think I'm in the wrong area. So specifically, I want to talk about the first branch of the Mabinogion and introduce some of the concepts that I've been working with around the idea of the underworld and how I've been exploring that through ritual. It's been a really interesting process. It kind of coincided with a number of life changes that were occurring for me as I was embarking on my OBOD journey. As a member of OBOD, I am working through the grades, so I've worked through the Bardic grade, and I started the OBOD journey a couple of years ago. And just before that, I was debating whether to go on a holiday because my father was terminally ill. But I did because we weren't sure just exactly how long we had. But thankfully, with some of my fellow druids who happened to be online, hi Rebecca, it was a beautiful journey, and it was a very deeply moving one. So it was fantastic. But what it did, it actually took me down a path of my druidry which I wasn't expecting, and I guess that's kind of what we're all looking for when we embark on these kinds of journeys. We're looking for a change, we're looking for a challenge, and we're looking to explore the world around us more deeply, but also ourselves more deeply. And so looking at it from that perspective, what I was able to reconnect with was something that's I've been connected with for decades. I did a lot of study around some of the Celtic mythology at uni, and I came across, I guess, like a lot of people, some of the concepts that are raised in the Mabinogion through authors like Marion Zimmer Bradley. However, one thing that stuck with me the most from the Mabinogion is actually from the first branch, and to come full circle, coming back to the OBOD journey, Gwyn was really prominent in my mind at the time, and almost as if, like a psychopomp, he was about to guide me on a journey of deeply internal work around the loss of a father, but also help me explore how to use that energy, how to use that story and that myth to transform myself, not just for this one particular life-changing event I was going through, but maybe in other ways too. So the particular area of the cycle that I'm talking about is the first branch, and I'm just going to look over at my notes every now and then just to make sure I stay on track and don't get carried away. But I think the most important thing about the branch, just in summary, we're talking about Pwlch on his out raiding or hunting. He becomes separated, then undergoes a journey into the underworld, and then comes back and is restored to himself after going through that underworld journey. But there are some really key, significant components of the myth, and that's something that's really important that I wanted to talk about because they actually come out through themes that can be explored in different ways. So some of the key characters I'm going to talk about are Pwlch, and when I talk about Pwlch, I'm really, I see that figure, that character as ourselves. I see us as being the Pwlch character. And when I talk about Aron, who is in this particular myth, the Lord of the Underworld, I also conflate him with Gwyn ap Nudd, who is later referred to as the Lord of the Underworld. And so, in terms of naming conventions, I do see them as the same figure. I do see their characters as being the same, even if by name they might be different. And there's a lot of scholarly debate about that. But for me, when I'm working with this story, when I'm shedding back those layers and looking further and deeper into it, I feel that for me, both Gwyn and Aron in this context are the same. So to give you before I go any further, just to sort of dive deeper into the story a little bit, Pwlch is on a raid or a hunting event with his companions, and he's separated, and the journey begins by Pwlch getting lost, going off track, getting deeper and deeper into the forest, and losing his way. He's accompanied by his hounds, and they come across a deer that's being eaten by other hounds, and they scare the hounds off, and he proceeds to allow his hounds to finish off the deer. Except, unbeknownst to him, those hounds were the hounds of Vanoon, and were and Aron at this point enters the story. He's offended by the act of this violating act that Pwlch had committed in his sense of entitlement, in his sense of bewilderment. He had no concept of consequence at this time, and as a result, he had to undergo an act of retribution. He needed to atone, and so, in agreement with Aron, he proceeds to enter the underworld in the form of Aron, and during this time, Aron will then take on the guise of Pwlch. And I'm just going to apologize for my pronunciations, because my Welsh pronunciation is pretty terrible. At this point, for a year and a day, he spends his time in Aron and undergoes, personal experiences that are befitting of him. He finds himself in this other world that's filled with wonder, and it's beautiful, and it's abundant. But he also needs to abstain. He needs to actually withdraw from certain parts of himself in order to survive the year and a day. And one specific act is not actually engaging in intercourse with Aron's wife. Now, that might, for whatever reason, you can look into that what you will. However, for me, I see this act of not participating in something that's intrinsic, that's very base and human, as an act of withdrawal, of seeking deeper meaning and understanding. So towards the end of that trial, in order to complete the cycle that he's undergoing, he needs to defeat also Aron's enemy, Hafgan. So there is this peculiarity in the story where the Lord of the Underworld actually has another Lord of the Underworld that he needs to compete with. But this is where, for me, this story actually still makes quite a lot of sense, because this other person, this Hafgan, actually divides the underworld. It separates Aron from part of it, which he's supposed to have complete dominion over. And so in defeating him, it's quite noticeably pointed out that he does it with one stroke, with one moment, with one strike of inspiration. He's able to undo this enemy of the underworld. And I think that in itself is that moment, that aha moment that perhaps we might be seeking when we do achieve some type of awareness. And so in doing so, in achieving that, being able to engage on that level, he meets Aron again, they resume their normal appearance, and he returns to the world. He's restored. He's returned to a kingdom that is abundant, that has done so well. There's been abundant rain, there's loads of harvest, there's so much food, everybody's really happy. It's the best year they've ever had. and that's the kingdom that he inherits. He comes back restored, and it's such a powerful cycle. And through it, I've just have been looking at it and unpacking it more and more to get a better feel for what exactly does it mean for me. Obviously, there's other references to Gwyn that kind of puts it in other contexts too, that come out later. Like in the Black Book of Carnarvon, there's references to Gwyn undergoing a battle with another enemy that he fights regularly on May Day for the hand of a woman, Crithiled, and each year the battle is annulled and nobody wins and nobody takes her hand. But in this section of the tale, it actually, for Aron, he actually comes out and Arthur is actually involved in this part too, and he says, well, you know, come Judgment Day, there will be a reckoning, there will be a settlement here. So there's this concept of wintering with Gwyn. There's this idea that during the winter months in Samhain, that's when we start engaging more and more with this material. This is when we start having deeper conversations with the Lord of the Underworld, because it's a time perhaps of internalization and fermentation. And so when we look at this journey that I described earlier with Pwylch, if we see ourselves in that, we can start imagining different ways that those themes could play out through us, and certainly through ritual, personal ritual, or even rituals that we might have around the seasons. So one of I've broken it down when I've been looking at this into 4 distinct aspects, and there's a lot more, but for the sake of this conversation tonight, I've just kept it relatively simple. So the 4 of the first theme that I just wanted to mention was looking at the fact that it starts off with a lost path. From the moment that we have lost the path, we then undergo an order of disruption. So the order of ourselves, the order of our world, how we look, how we present ourselves to the world, that all is disrupted. That all gets changed. That all gets stripped right back. We become something else in order to undergo what the next part is, which is achieving restoration. There's a few other parts in between that you might undergo, and certainly it's explored in this story too. So we're moving through losing our path, losing our identity, or disrupting our ordered self to undergo a process of restoration so that we can be reborn, so that we can come through that renewed. Another way that I've broken it down is looking at it through law, love, power, and property. Looking at it perhaps a little more radical, a little bit more political way of using those themes to turn it into something magically active, and something that we can direct and focus into something that throughout winter we might be fermenting, that we might be gestating. And I guess with those motifs, looking at the law, when we start at this story, we're entering something that is unknown. We are entering this story via a path that we haven't walked before. So this is something where it's uncertain, and we need to start stripping back the layers that might have separated ourselves from our magical selves, separated ourselves from the pathways to connect with this magic, to connect with this enchantment that we've been separated from. And so by undergoing that transformation, we then enter the path of love, self-love. We start examining ourselves, we start looking deeper in ourselves, we start understanding what's really important to us. We don't just frivolously we don't just frivolously move through the world without intention. We start learning to love ourselves. And through that process of self-love, we undergo a transformation of our own power. We can actually suddenly find ourselves tapping into something where we are empowered to bring about change and action for ourselves, for the benefit of ourselves and those around us and the places we occupy, the land itself. And further, what that leads to is property, in this sense, returning to our kingdom, but more about returning to our sovereignty, returning to our own power, returning to what we are not, I don't like to use the word entitled, but we are sovereign over those parts of ourselves which have been taken away. And again, that's where it becomes potentially a political, magical intention that as Druids, we might want to take it back and explore how that can empower us to be advocates for change in the world, and protectors of those sacred places that we visit. The other way that I stripped it back was looking at a cycle of death through motivation or intention, through trial, and then the process of reward and balance. And then the last one that I was looking at was looking at it from the perspective of chaos. And so if we look at it through the chaotic lens of disruption, the first bit that we encounter on our path is a complex system that's represented by the path that we're on that's convoluted, that we can't penetrate, followed by the unpredictable change. We're entering a situation that we don't know about, so we need to be mindful of ourselves. We need to be in the moment. We need to live through that experience, which may lead to a random appearance. So in terms of random appearance, suddenly there's a moment of awareness. There's that moment of pure awe where something becomes really clear and in our minds, and we want to take that forward. And that's where we move back into the sensibility of the situation, whereby suddenly we're trying to return ourselves to equilibrium. So it can be quite an interesting process looking at myth. We start off with a story. Here's Wilk stealing somebody's deer, finds himself in the underworld, comes back and finds his kingdom even better. But we're stripping it right back and we're exploring it from a very magical, esoteric perspective to see how we can use that cultural inheritance that we have in our mythology to become more active politically, more magically active in our communities, and also how we can share these stories in a very modern way, so or a very local way. I know quite a few people online. Julie's written some beautiful work of ways to modernize elements of Welsh mythology, and this is another aspect of that. We don't necessarily need to take a literal interpretation of it, but what we've done is we've taken in this context, I've taken something that's really kind of academic and turned it into something that's kind of the basis for magical practice. And through that we're actually creating pathways to our ancestry. We're creating pathways to the myth. We're connecting with myth, and through myth we're connecting with gods and our spiritual selves. We're connecting with our higher powers, our bright ones, whatever we like to call them. We're actually deepening our practice and our experience of that by walking these paths that have been walked before us by so many people. I think that there's quite a lot that I can continue saying about this, but I think coming back to how Gwyn fits into this and how he is such an important aspect of all these stories, that Gwyn is the vehicle. Gwyn is the companion. Gwyn is the one who allows us to go on this journey. He's later associated with the Wild Hunt. Arawn in the Mabinogi is also essential for the hunt. He's essential for engaging in magical activities. He's an important character that we can call upon to accompany us in our battles, whether they be spiritual, emotional, physical. These are ways that we can see examples in myth where we can remove some of those layers and we can unpack that a little bit more, and we can see it a little bit more deeply. And of course, one key theme is that fact that I mentioned earlier, is that he's also considered a psychopomp, so someone who accompanies the dead. But you can also through that explore it not so much in a literal sense of dying, but undergoing a shadow death, undergoing some kind of deeper examination of our shadow selves, and so allowing us to go down that overgrown path to meet Gwyn and allow him to take us into the underworld, allow us to step into that role of one of the tribe and become, you know, one of the children of the moon, and allow us to walk that path, to explore ourselves, to confront our shadows, to confront that part of ourselves that we need to explore more, but come back triumphant, come back whole, and more in touch with our inspiration, more in touch with our sovereignty. So I am. It's. I know I've just vomited a whole bunch of information there, but it's something that I'm really loving. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if anybody does post something that they want answered. And if you are going to be at the OBOD gathering in April, I'm preparing a bit of a workshop, less of a talk, more of a workshop, interactive workshop, where we'll be looking at this same material in a bit more detail. So I've been going for about 21 minutes now. I've said a lot, and I appreciate everybody's time tonight. I hope you enjoy the talk, and to those who plan on attending the OBOD gathering in April, I'll see you all then. Thanks everybody, and have a wonderful night.